Hello and welcome back to my VW Bus restoration series. In this video, I'll show you a few ways to plug rust pinholes, and then I'll show you how I fix some rusted window sill areas, and then finally I'm going to show you how I patched up a few factory holes in the body that I really have no use for. So stay tuned. There's a lot of places, especially around the windows, where I just have a small compromised section. And again, my finger for scale, I'm calling this pinholes, but they're also, maybe the size of a small drill bit that also have to be plugged. Now, this has to be cut out and re-grafted in a patch, but there's an easier way to do things that are this small, and I'm going to show you a couple approaches. First approach that I'm going to do is the just filling it with weld. Now, the two criteria that I'm going to use for determining whether I'm even capable of doing that is, do I have access behind this weld? And so what I'll do is I'll stick my fingers up underneath here, and you can see that I do have access. I can at least reach around here. It's not great because I have to reach all the way underneath here, but it is possible. And so if I have the ability to access underneath here, not only access underneath here, but also to be able to sand it, and I was able to do that. In tight situations, a very thin belt sander, it's pneumatic, this actually helps out a lot. I was able to get that up both underneath and on top of that little hole. Now that we have this clean top and bottom, we can then fill it. But one of the problems I have as an amateur welder is blowing holes through, thinner gauge metal. This is probably 20 gauge skin on the car. So one thing to help with that is by taking a piece of copper and putting it up underneath, and if you can get this copper backing up under there and held there, that is ideal, and then you don't have to worry too much about blowing holes through your metal and potentially making that problem worse. Now, how do I get a small piece of copper like this, a little thin piece of copper? Well, that's actually pretty easy. I just took a standard kind of plumbing copper pipe, probably 3/4 would make it an even bigger patch. I just cut off a section, then cut it lengthwise, and then just pounded it out into a square plate. And then from there you can, pound it and shape it in any way you need. So that's the best way of getting a little copper backing plate. And as long as I can hold that up underneath here, we should be able to plug weld that pretty safely. I was able to get that copper piece wedged up in here just using a bar behind there. So luckily I don't have to hold that with my hand. So now I'm just going to shoot some weld in there and we'll see what happens. Well, it took a couple rounds because, around that spot, I'd patch it, blow a little bit of a hole in it, and then around that spot I'd have to kind of reposition the copper and do it again. And it's still, a little bit pitted, but the hole is closed up for sure. Okay, now the second way that I am going to fill a pinhole is using a Por 15 patch. Now this is the windshield. I'll back up a little bit here. And we have this little pinhole, and I've ground it out and kind of cleaned it up, and that's pretty much it. Now, the reason I'm not welding this is because if I reach back behind here, there's no way to really get inside here so I can hold, I can hold in something and prevent me from blowing holes in that. So, and because it's so small, I mean, you can see from my finger, that's really tiny. I'm going to use a Por 15 patch in this. This is the stuff here. It is waterproof, apply over rust for steel, wood, plastic, concrete, and everything. In the directions behind there, it says they don't recommend using this on body work because it is extremely difficult to sand. Well, when they say body, in places where you need it cosmetically perfect. Technically, I am going to be filling this. I mean, you could argue that that's going to be covered by the seal of the window. This won't, But if you can see the way I did this here, I basically, using gloves, you do not want to get this on your skin. Using gloves, you can apply that, and I used a little bit of a knife. I'll show you the demonstration in a second. But when I go over this, I make sure that it fills in, but it's actually a low spot there. So it fills it in, but it's not raised. So I'll just get a little on my finger and just kind of put it in there. Just make sure it's coated real well. You can see it also fills in kind of the other rust divots, which is totally fine. It's fine for, you know, we don't want to have any high spots, but low spots are just fine as long as we plug it up. I'm gonna get a little paper towel. You can probably hear me tearing that off, and just make sure I wipe off again, you know, all those areas that I don't want. You can see it's not quite filling it in, so I'll keep pushing some more in until I see that it's completely filled in that hole. And then I'll wipe off anything that I think is going to be a high spot. Because again, this doesn't sand well. You can grind it okay when it's dry, but it doesn't sand like a filler would. At this point, I had let the Pour 15 patch cure, and I had also go over it with Pour 15 paint, and now I'm prepping around that paint, and I'm also sanding it lightly on an actual Pour 15 painted surface. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some primer, and I have to use a special Pour 15 primer called, this is the rattle can version. They also have another high build primer that can go over Pour 15 paint, and I'm just going to prime that area. This is the process I'm going to use for all the windowsills and doorways and anywhere that's prone to rust. And once I get to this point, then I'm going to do the rest of the body work, filler and primer. We're going to continue on with some more patchless patches, I guess I'll call them, where we're going to fix these minor issues here, like pinholes or just little bits of windowsill being rotted away, without actually putting in new metal. We will be using a welder, obviously, but we won't be putting in new metal. So we're going to have to do this one on this side, and there's a little bit of rot right there and right here, and then of course we have some more pinholes, so we'll go ahead and try to plug those with weld as well. And so I'll show you how I do that in just a moment. Okay, we're going to start with this patch right here because it's a small one, just to show you kind of the technique that I'm using here. What I'm starting with is this copper bar, and this is a bus bar that I had in the old electric car. It's a fairly thick piece of material here. You can see I already did a patch with it before, so what I'll do is just kind of do a little sanding on it just to make it, you know, get any of the, you know, junk off of it. And that should be clean enough right there. Then what we're going to do, going to get a couple vice grips, and we'll put it back here. This is actually the most, you know, perfect for this type of thing here. And I'm going to go ahead and clamp it. Go. And the bigger the piece of copper that you can find, and if you don't have something like this, you might find it at a, either order it online, maybe on Amazon, you know, it's like electrical parts stuff, or if you have an electrical parts store, they might have copper bus bars and things like that. They might be used in industrial purposes or commercial purposes. So anyway, the copper bar is fitted in here, and now I'll go ahead and turn my welder on. I'm running 3.5 voltage and 35 wire speed. It's a little bit less than welding onto 20 gauge sheet metal, but it seems to be working okay and not blowing any holes or doing anything weird. Now what I'm going to attempt to do here is I'm still just using tacks, right? So because this metal is so thin, you can't just, you know, weld. It'll heat up too quick. So I'm still tacking it. And what I'll do is I'll start at the lowest spot and I'll start tacking right onto the top of the metal that's there, and I'll just let that cool, move to the next spot, and I'll keep, and then once it cools, I'll build on top of that. So I'm just tacking and tacking, starting at the bottom, and then working my way up as those tacks cool off. I'm going to give this copper bar a little time to cool off because the copper retains heat pretty well, so be really careful when removing your copper bar. It's going to be hot for a little while. It's pretty ugly, and it doesn't have to be pretty. So now what I'm going to do is just grind it away and see if I can make it match the sill. I think, there's probably some more well I could put in there, but I think that's solid enough for that windowsill, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. All right, next I'm going to attempt this section near the corner here, and I'm also going to try to get some of those pinholes plugged as well. Well, there is the completed sill. The white stuff you see on there is Port 15 patch. I just wiped it, just a thin coat on the inner rim here, just to fill in all those, little low spots. And but it's good enough to get the seal on there. And tomorrow I'll go ahead and sand it down before we put the Port 15 paint on it. Next we'll move on to some metal patching of some factory holes that were in the body. I start with tracing out the hole with a new piece of metal I'm holding behind the hole. There it is. Then I'll just roughly cut that piece out with my grinder. And then I carefully sculpt it to my original cut line with my bench grinder. After prepping the whole front and back, I add some magnets to hold the new piece in. And then after dropping it a few times, that's all part of the process, I put the piece in place. Boom, perfect fit. Now I just put a few tack welds into it to hold it in place. And then I complete the welding by stitching it all in. Then I clean up the tacks with my grinder. And then I sand the surface both front and back. And then I do a little bit of body work here just to straighten the metal out. Clean it, and then a little bit of primer graffiti will complete that project. Now, it wouldn't be a Fix It Scotty restoration video if I didn't do a little Pour 15 pouring. Here's the front area in the middle of prep work here. And then here is it all painted up, looking all nice and shiny. Well, that's it for this video. Subscribe to my channel to follow the progress of this project, or click the playlist at the end to catch up on previous episodes. Thanks for watching.